Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited and I'm very happy to host my dear friend Ant. And Ant is the founder of the community stuff for serverless. While we are not even aware of serverless, he built the first ServerlessDays in London, and it was not even called serverless at that time. It was called JeffConf back in 2016, right? Ant?
Yeah, JeffConf was 2017.
Really? Yeah.
But the first London ServerlessDays meetup, first London meetup was 2016, but JeffConf was 2017.
Yeah. So, Ant is also leading our efforts in ServerlessDays globally, and we are organizing with him the ServerlessDays Virtual. And the next ServerlessDays Virtual will be on the April 28th, right, Ant? Yeah.
I'm got to keep track of these things.
So he was not in the last meeting, that's why. Today, like, I don't want to introduce you more because I can say thousands of words about you, but I will give it to you. And today he's going to talk about the functions at the edge. And here you go, and thanks.
Cool. Thanks for that great introduction, Emma. Hi, my name's Ant. I'm a South African based in London. Been doing serverless since 2015. And I just want to talk about, it's probably not a new phenomenon, but it's something that's been maturing, and there's some really good offerings right now around serverless at the edge. So we're going to really focus early on, give you a high-level overview of what this means, and then kind of dive down into a bit of a demo. So obviously, my name is Ant Stanley. Currently, I'm a co-founder of a business called Senzo. We run a platform called Homeschool. Check it out, homeschool.dev. It's a completely serverless platform, and it's an education platform focusing on serverless and cloud native computing. So let's quickly have a quick look. Brief history of the edge. The edge is a very misused word in tech, like most words, like serverless and DevOps and everything else. I did a search, went to Wikipedia and said, okay, let me try and get a definition of what serverless is, what the edge is, not serverless, what the edge is. And obviously the first thing I got was the edge from U2. And he was the edge way before the edge was the edge, which is definitely what everyone wants to hear. So I realized this isn't quite the edge I was expecting. I don't think he's serverless, not yet. So I had to dig a bit deeper, and from Wikipedia gave me another definition. Like all things, it's a bit complicated. So what is Wikipedia's definition of the edge? Edge computing specifically. So it's distributed computing paradigm that brings computation and data storage close to the location where it is needed to improve response times and save bandwidth. It almost sounds like client server architecture, It's about having the compute in that run closer to the user. So in a world where we still have distributed systems, now it's about not just extending your application beyond your data center or beyond your cloud infrastructure and bringing it closer to the user. But this is still a very broad statement. It could mean a lot of things, but ultimately it just means compute and data closer to your user. So what we really care about, that's what I think about it. What we really care about is the overlap of where serverless and the edge, where these two things overlap. What does that mean? And we've got some pretty good answers on that now. So let's look at content delivery networks. I'm going to go back a bit. So content delivery networks have been around for 20, almost 30 years. So from late 90s, content delivery networks have existed, and they've been a way to deliver static assets, deliver content to users via network. So essentially bringing the static assets, the data which doesn't change often, to your users. So where this overlap is, it's with content delivery networks who have this edge infrastructure because they have been bringing static content closer to users for years. And CDNs have hundreds of POPs. Some have more than 200, some have 300 POPs, points of presence around the world. So when we look at service in the edge, it's really about these CDNs now enhancing their networks and now deciding to run cloud functions. So what does that look like? Well, first of all, what it's doing is it's transforming these CDNs from just these dumb services, which is what they historically were. Folks would, big corporations, let's say your media site, you would actually sign up with 2 or 3 CDNs. A lot of them still do this, and you'd actually load balance across them because CDNs would be cheap. They'd bring your static content close to your users. All the intelligence, anything dynamic content will still be done within your data center, and your CDNs would just do all the static stuff that doesn't change. And they've been around for years. By adding cloud functions to these CDNs, now enabling functions to run on the edge in these points of presence, it's effectively turned these CDNs into edge computing platforms. They're effectively really turning them into clouds, cloud computing platforms that operate close to your user. And that changes a lot of things. First of all, it improves performance is the biggest thing. If a user's response is coming from to a dynamic request is coming from a local POP that's under a millisecond away from them, or under 10 milliseconds away from them, that's going to massively improve performance. So that's the biggest thing, but also enables new architectures and new ways of doing things. So let's have a look at what the offerings are in this space. So AWS are first. They released a thing called Lambda at Edge. Lambda at Edge was a collaboration between the Lambda team and the CloudFront team in AWS. Effectively, the Lambda team provide a runtime, and the CloudFront team provision it. So, if you go into AWS console, Lambda at Edge is part of the CloudFront offering. It's not part of the Lambda offering. It's got a few constraints around it, but that is probably the first. Or I say that the first. It's the first of the modern cloud functions at the edge offerings. I'll get back into it. Cloudflare subsequently has released their workers. Fastly had their compute at edge, and there's a few other offerings out there now. I'll go into those later, but I want to concentrate on these 3 because they're all very different and they all have different characteristics. I talked about Lambda being the first of the modern edge compute platforms, and actually Fastly had an edge compute platform before. Fastly was built and is built on a technology stack called Varnish, and Varnish was essentially a reverse proxy caching server that folks initially would have run within as open source tool. They would have run within their data centers in front of their web servers. And what Fastly did is they took Varnish and they essentially created a network of Varnish servers around the world doing the caching close to users. Varnish has a thing called I think it's Varnish Configuration Varnish Control Language, VCL, which enables you to write simple basic functions that can run within Varnish. So Fastly has been doing functions using Varnish, this VCL templating language, which I think is based in C or C++, for years, but it was very specific to them. It wasn't very accessible. You had to learn this new language and new way of doing things. It wasn't really community around it. There's not really a good body of knowledge around it. You got to Stack Overflow, it's not a lot. So the concept predates Lambda, but Lambda at Edge. But Lambda at Edge is the first doing it kind of with more standardized languages. So let's look at the difference between these 3, because these are probably the 3 leading platforms right now. So Lambda at Edge supports Node.js and Python. And then, so it supports Node.js and Python. It's a little bit behind the Node version that normal AWS Lambda will run. They basically downstream all the changes. Workers. So the interesting thing is with Lambda at Edge, it's Node.js or Python runtimes that are running on the edge. Workers, it supports JavaScript and WASM, and through WASM, any language, so WASM was WebAssembly, any language that can compile down to WASM, WebAssembly, it supports as well. So things like Rust and C and so on and so forth. It's based on V8. V8 is a JavaScript engine within Chrome, and all Chromium browsers run V8. One of the nice things about it, V8 also has support for WASM, for WebAssembly, because websites can run WASM. V8 also exists within Node.js. The difference between V8 and Lambda at Edge and the V8 in Workers is that Lambda at Edge is running a specific version of Node.js. It runs whatever version of V8 comes with that version of Node.js. So it's a little bit behind whatever the latest version is. And then on top of that, it's got all the Node.js binaries and APIs on top of that, whereas Workers don't have any of the Node.js ecosystem. Workers is similar to a web worker that you can run in a browser, and the API looks the same. And it's almost like running browser code, but in a private function. So the way you write the code is slightly different versus Node.js and Workers, or it's very different actually, Node.js and Workers, even though you can both do JavaScript. And then Fastly's platform is really interesting. It's a pure WebAssembly-based platform. They've invested a ton of engineering. It's called Lucid, Lucid. It's a pure WebAssembly runtime. So when Workers implements WebAssembly, it's implementing WebAssembly through V8. So V8's an engine that can run JavaScript and WebAssembly, 2 languages. And there's some trade-offs around performance in that, because it's not 2 engines. It's 1 engine that has kind of a secondary engine that runs WASM, whereas Fastly is a pure WASM engine. And you'll see just now, there are definite performance benefits to doing that. Though, of course, it doesn't run native JavaScript. If you want to run anything on Fastly's platform, you write it in another language, you compile it down to WASM, and off you go. Okay, so what's those weren't supposed to come up together, but that's fine. Cool. So startup times are interesting. So with Node.js startup times are typically around 200 milliseconds for the Node.js VM to start up, 250, 260 milliseconds. That's not what you get with Lambda at Edge. AWS will pre-provision a bunch of functions without any code, and basically when there's an invoke, a function with a running Node.js runtime will get your custom code. So cold start doesn't include the time to start the Node.js runtime. Cold start is the time to start your code. So typically a cold start in Lambda and Edge will be in the double-digit milliseconds, around there. Same thing with Workers. So V8 start time for a V8 instance of isolate is often around 5 milliseconds. Sorry, it should have been less than, not greater than. It's 5 milliseconds or less, around the 5 millisecond mark. Workers say 0 milliseconds. It will be in the microseconds, but they say 0 milliseconds. Effectively, it's a similar thing. Cloudflare will have a bunch of pre-provisioned Workers isolates. So they're the instance name for a worker. Lambda Edge run within micro VMs, Workers run within isolates, which if you think about your Chrome browser, every time you open up a new tab, what that new tab is doing is it's creating a new isolate of V8. So the mechanisms that Chrome uses to isolate your different tabs within Chrome and isolate the JavaScript, because JavaScript running in one tab in your browser can't talk to JavaScript running in another tab. That same mechanism, same security mechanism is what Cloudflare uses to spin up multiple instances, multiple functions within one platform. So they would effectively pre-provision a bunch of isolates at invocation time, they deliver your code, and they execute it. And the cold starts are effectively non-existent. Fastly, with their computed edge platform, what they say is it takes 35.4 microseconds. They give you this exact number because they measure it. Out of all of these like scripting-based VM language VMs, the WASM one is way faster than V8 and Node.js, way faster. It's got a far smaller API to start up. It's just starting up a WASM engine. It's a very efficient language. It's very, very fast. And Fastly computed edge functions are the fastest you can get. There are some caveats around them, but from a pure performance perspective, in terms of invocation time, they're the fastest you can get. The reality is every single one of these will improve your end user experience because they're all going to be executing close to your users than something in a centralized API. And there's also a lot more to performance than execution time of a function. So the other thing, Lambda at Edge is 30 seconds is the maximum amount of time that a Lambda at Edge function can run for. Cloudflare, it's 10 milliseconds on their free plan, their starter plan, or 50 milliseconds on their paid plan. And that's actually, for the examples I'm going to show you later, is exactly what works fine. Fastly computed edge. The computed edge is still in preview. It's been in preview for over a year. So they haven't fully disclosed or published all the limits and restrictions around it. So hopefully it comes out of preview. Like I said, it's been over 12 months that it's been in preview. And as far as I know, it's fully subscribed, so you can't get into that preview already unless you're spending a lot of money with Fastly. But it will be interesting to have a look at that platform once it comes out of preview. Okay. And then, yeah, let's look at the age of these things. So AWS's Lambda at Edge, if I remember correctly, was announced in reInvent 2016 and went GA 2017. Cloudflare Workers was announced in 2017 and went GA, general availability, in March 2018. And Fastly's computer edge platform has been in preview for over a year. It's an interesting dynamic because these three companies have all approached it in a very different way. AWS went, let's repurpose what we have. They slimmed it down. They've added a few constraints to make it faster, to stop people running inefficient code, that kind of thing. And they said just repurposed it and reused what they did, and they've done a good job. And lots of companies use Lambda at Edge, particularly if you're in that AWS ecosystem. It's got all the things you get with AWS. So you've got the IAM controls and all of that around it. Okay, so the other side is Cloudflare Workers. They decided to come up with a new novel approach, which is also really interesting, invested a lot of engineering effort into it. The V8-based approach gives a really good development experience. It makes it really accessible to front-end developers. If you're used to writing JavaScript in the front end, adopting Workers is going to be really easy for you because all the APIs look the same. There's a bunch of the front-end APIs that exist in your browser, exist within V8, which they don't exist in Node.js. So it's really easy to adopt. Fastly have gone for probably the highest performance option, but with the trade-off that they've got this bleeding edge WebAssembly based platform where there's limited support around, how you transpile to WebAssembly. WebAssembly is still really new. It's still a developing thing. So the developer ecosystem doesn't quite exist there yet. It's still growing. And that's going to be interesting to watch it play out. And multiple languages have compilers across to WebAssembly, but a lot of them are still very early days. It's still a little rough around the edges. If you had a problem with it, you can't just go to Stack Overflow and find an answer. So yeah, this kind of the different approaches are interesting, and they all have different trade-offs. And we'll go into a bit more because it is more than just the compute platform, that matters. It's about the ecosystem that actually matters. Okay, so beyond these three, Netlify have also announced a thing called Edge Handlers, and Akamai have a thing called Edge Workers. It seems if you're going to have name your CDN functions, your Edge functions, you have to have the word workers or Edge in it, one or the other. Otherwise, people won't know what it is. The Netlify and Akamai offerings, both in preview, they're both based on V8 too. So they've followed Cloudflare's lead. Netlify announced theirs towards the second half of last year. It's still in preview. So if you know Netlify, ask them nicely if you're already using Netlify, but it's V8 based. It's different to Netlify Function. Netlify Functions was built on top of AWS Lambda, and that's a more centralized platform. So Netlify Functions is Lambda compute with the Netlify's network. So it's not API gateway, it's Netlify's endpoints. So it's Netlify's CDNs that redirect your function code to a Lambda function on the backend. That's Lambda Functions. Edge Handlers is a V8-based, edge-based compute platform. So it's more similar to Cloudflare Workers. Akamai is also similar to Cloudflare Workers. They're clearly following Cloudflare's lead, saying, hey, this platform works, this way works, and they're going with that. So it will be interesting to see whether the WASM-based approach or the V8-based approach wins out, but a lot of folks are now taking the V8-based approach. What do you use it for? So typical things that I just went to all the different websites and said, what do people say the use cases are? Typically like URL decoding, A/B testing. If you want to make sure one set of users gets one set of content, another set of users gets another set of content. Do that decision making, that decision tree. Do it on the edge, close to the user. Don't do it back, at your API. Authorization, authentication. Don't do your OAuth authentication. Way back in a central service. Do it, on the edge. Personalization, localization. So a user in Turkey sees one thing, a user in the United States sees another thing, and you can have a function in Turkey saying, "Hey, this user's coming in from Turkish POP. I'm going to deliver them the Turkish relevant information. This user's coming in from a US POP. I'm going to deliver them the US relevant information." Aggregation of external APIs. So let's say you've built a service where you've got 2 or 3 APIs. Instead of presenting those 2 or 3 APIs directly to the client, to your web app or mobile app, have your cloud function sitting on the edge do that aggregation and maybe even do some caching there as well. And you can do routing as well, so routing aggregation probably overlap a bit. So you've got one HTTP path, you can say, okay, you have a function that redirects it to, or you might end up having, local, let's say you've got an app that's globally spread across the AWS region. So something that's sitting in EU West, EU Central 1 in Frankfurt, or you've got something sitting in US East 1, and you've got in Sydney, AP Southeast 2. And you've got your core infrastructure and your application sitting in those areas. What you might want to do is then present the APIs for those applications in an edge worker, in an edge function that basically will redirect the user to the closest application instance. So that's also application routing as a good use. There's lots of uses for this. Block list, access control list is another one. So with all of these functions, question is, which one do you use? I'd say if you're all in an AWS and you need some of the AWS integration, Lambda at Edge was always a good case. Fastly is not even a choice because your preview is already oversubscribed and it's not available. That's definitely one to evaluate and keep watching. For me, it has to be Cloudflare Workers. Right now is probably the leading function at the Edge platform. And it's not necessarily because of the functions, it's because it's the platform. So what do I mean? There's more than just functions with Cloudflare Workers, and they keep calling it the Workers platform. So they've got Workers, which is the functions element. They've got Workers KV, which is key value store, and they've got durable objects. So what the key value store? It's a really, really simple key value store, globally distributed. So Cloudflare love to talk about they have a global region. It's a good way to create a facade in front of your applications. So with key value store, it's literally key value store. The values can be 25 megabytes, so you can store up to 25 meg per key. It's built on top of Cloudflare's cache. And you can do some interesting things with it. It's relatively performant. It's good for heavy read. It's not great for writes. So your writes are going to be up to 60 seconds. It can take up to a minute for a write to reflect. So think about that. So you use it for stuff that's heavily read required and not that requires a lot of reads, and something that isn't write intensive. So something heavily transactional, it's not a good idea. You can implement CQRS with it. So CQRS is essentially a way to split your reads and your writes. So what you might want to do with this is using Cloudflare function, Cloudflare Workers and Workers KV. You can do things like hit your API to write. You send it to your AWS infrastructure, DynamoDB, which then, off the DynamoDB trigger, you can then update the key value store in Workers KV. So all writes get redirected to your core infrastructure sitting in AWS, and all reads come off your key value store. And that's a pretty common use case, and you see a lot of that. Or you can just use it as a cache. One of the nice things about Workers KV is you can you can expire the storage as well. So when you write a key value pair into the KV store, you can put an expiry on it. So you can say, okay, I want to use this as a cache. So get a request, create a hash out of the request, use that hash on the as your key, search KV store. Do I have that data? No, I don't. Get it from your central database, and then push it, and then return it back to the user while storing it in KV store, and put like an hour expiry or 2 hour expiry or whatever it is. And that's a really common use case for KV store. Also session management. If you're using authentication, you want to create user sessions, you can use KV store for that as well. The other newish platform that's in preview with Cloudflare is durable objects. And that's a way to provide persistent state to your function. So KV stores are KV stores, not really a state machine or anything like that. What durable objects allows you to do is allows you to, like I said, provide persistent state. So think about, and also share that state between users, for example. So think about Google Docs, how users can collaborate on that. So Google Docs does that collaboration work all within peer-to-peer within the browser. You could build a Google Docs type service using durable objects, but offloading all that work of maintaining state between multiple users working on one doc to workers and durable objects, because durable objects can maintain that state across multiple users. It's a really interesting service. It's also only in preview. It's not something you can play with today, but it's definitely something to watch, because I think a lot of people are going to start building things like chat applications and collaboration applications on top of durable objects. But it's been a tough one to solve in the functions world because it's always stateless compute. Durable objects provide state around that, so it's super interesting. So one of the nice things that I like about AWS and I like about Cloudflare is that they build on top of themselves. So AWS at the last reInvent, they said 50% of their new releases were all use Lambda. So AWS uses their own tools to build their own services, and Cloudflare adopts the same thing. So if you go to the Workers site, their marketing site, they'll have a whole section of things built on top of Cloudflare Workers. So their Cloudflare Access, for example, so they build a lot of their own services on top of Cloudflare Workers, and that kind of gives me inspiration. Like, what can I do with this thing? So I'm going to talk through one of the services that Cloudflare has built on top of Cloudflare Workers, just to maybe help you, inspire you, and give you an idea of what you could potentially do with it. So I think end of last year, they released a thing called Automatic Platform Optimization for WordPress. There's the long URL at the bottom. Just search blog.cloudflare.com for it. There's two blogs there. One is the marketing release, one is the technical release. Read the technical release. It's super interesting. But essentially what this platform does is it turns WordPress sites into kind of static sites. It pre-renders a lot of things for you. It does a bunch of rewrites and delivers it. But essentially, with a traditional CDN with WordPress, you would just you would cache the static assets, and you could potentially cache the HTML as well. With Cloudflare, it's an enterprise option to cache HTML, but the static assets, your images, that kind of thing, any PDFs or anything else that needs to be static images, static assets, Cloudflare would just cache. So what APO does, it's built on Cloudflare Workers. It does pre-fetches, does fetches on your content. So that whole, gets a request. Do I have this in my cache, which is KV store? If it doesn't have it in the cache, it goes off and fetches it from WordPress, serves it. And that's kind of what a CDN would do. It's like, why am I using Workers? What they do with Workers is they do some magic in there. So they do things like, okay, this page we've just fetched. They interrogate the page and say, oh, it fetches a font from Google. If you've worked with page performance, fonts and having third-party URLs, that's third-party assets that you don't cache can often hurt the performance of your site. Also, it's going to create another web connection, another connection that your browser needs to make with the third party. So you go to most standard sites, you actually connect to 3 or 4 different websites. So it's connecting to, the site, the actual site. This might be downloading fonts from another site. It might be downloading analytics JavaScript from another site. What Cloudflare do with Workers is they interrogate the HTML. They see all the third-party sites that this HTML is going to get requests, and it fetches those assets itself. And then it delivers all of that. So it fetches those assets, rewrites the HTML that's been delivered to say, okay, you're no longer going to request this asset from, this has a Google font, from Google. We now have cached this font ourselves, and you're going to request it from us ourselves. So what that does is it reduces the number of connections the end user browser needs to make. It means everything's cached in one place. And if you've got third-party APIs that are variable for performance, Google is normally pretty good, but you might have some other service API that you've got built in that's relatively slow. That all goes away because they're using Workers to do this fetch of the third-party assets, cache those third-party assets itself, and deliver it. So it's a really interesting platform, and it's all built on Workers and KV Store. It's a combination of Workers KV and Workers that does it. So it's so it brings intelligence to the way you cache things, and it's a really interesting service. So it's something you can do. So I'm going to stop blabbering. I've talked really fast, so I hope I haven't lost everyone. I'm going to do a really quick demo. This is probably going to go horrifically bad, but we'll figure it out. So I need to get this. Okay, okay, cool. So let's go back to this. Okay, I hope everyone can see this. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Cool. Okay. So Workers from a command line uses, actually, let me just quickly show you okay, so this is actually the ServerlessDays Workers account I'm using as my player account. So this is a Workers website. I don't need that account ID. I might need to change that. I might need to delete this account, but who knows? So this is the Workers console. It's relatively simple. This is a basic demo. I've got, you get some basic metrics. This hasn't really been used. Your worker can either be triggered by a request, or you can create cron jobs. So you can create crons set on timings. And then you can create environment variables. You create environment variables, and you can also get them to encrypt environment variables. So you can create a test, and okay, hello, and if you just click that button, it gets encrypted. Let's save. Cool. So now we have an environment variable there called hello, and our website can use that. Okay, it's relatively simple. There's not much you can do. KV, you just declare, there's no browser for the KV store. You just declare your KV stores, the namespaces for them, they have IDs. That's not the full ID, so I'm not too stressed. And these are going to be deleted, so I'm not too stressed about that. And one of the things you do is you create your production, and you create a staging or development. With this one, I've got a prod and a staging one. I'll show you where those come in later, but you just create your KV store. It's very simple. You can only get data and put data. You can't list data or anything like that, just get and put. I'm on the free plan, so I only get a gig of storage. This is a free plan. You can get more, obviously, and you charge for more if you use, what's the plans? These are the plans. So 100,000 requests per day, that's a lot. 10 milliseconds time versus 50 milliseconds, 10 million requests, so on and so forth. I'll go into that. So that's what that looks like. Cool. So that's where we are. They do have another service. So if just quickly on the plans, you've got, this is called Workers Bundled. I can't remember what the actual name is. They've got a thing called Workers Unbound. So they're going to be, basically Workers Unbound is going to have higher CPU time and more power, basically. And you'll keep seeing that iterating through. So how do I deploy to this? You can, if you just want to play with things, you can go to Cloudflare Workers.com. This is just a playground, and this is just a tutorial. This is what your typical Cloudflare Workers code looks like. So like you're within a browser, you add an event listener to listen to an event. So if you're writing client-side code, you typically have, you add an event listener to listen to a click event or a scroll event or something like that. In Workers, you add an event listener to listen to a fetch event, and then you execute this function. So they create a function called handle request. And when you handle requests, it's going to log out the GOT request, or console log GOT request and log out the request details. It's doing a fetch somewhere and then it responds. So it's just actually fetching itself. So that's all this does here. So update, this keeps running. So it fetches itself here. So I could just go, let me check this out. So this here was actually a fetch so using the browser fetch API, it was basically sending a fetch to itself to tutorials.cloudflare Workers. So whatever it got told to do, it fetch itself. So I've stopped doing that. Cool, I've got some errors there. Bring it back in. But this is a playground where you can just play with it. I've only ever really used this for like minor debugging. I'm a little bit aware of like copying and pasting production code into a web-based portal with no authentication. It is interesting. It's interesting for the debugging because console.log is better here than anywhere else. But you can play with that. Okay, so how do we deploy? How do we work to this? You use your traditional environment. So Workers has a CLI called Wrangler. So I've installed it. You need npm to install it. That's a version of Wrangler. So to install it, it's npm install at Cloudflare. Well, let me just clear this so you can actually see at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so npm install at Cloudflare/Wrangler. You can install it globally if you want. They recommend installing it globally. If you're going to be using within a continuous integration, continuous deployment tool, you'll need to install it with that tool. So it's relatively simple. And you've got a bunch of commands. So if we go, so let's go. I'm going to create I'll call it test. If I can make a directory properly and spell. Okay. Cool, nothing in there. Okay, so I want to create, this will just be our code. I want to do Wrangler init. So what Wrangler init does is it just does your basic configuration. One thing, with Wrangler, you got to log in. I've already logged into this, but to be Wrangler login, to log in. So if you look, where is it? So Wrangler login will authenticate you. If that fails, you can also use config to, you get an API key in the console and you can bring it back. So those are the two ways. I've had this fail on me a few times, so I end up using config a lot just to do that. So, yep, I've created index.js. That's going to be my function. I've created a wrangler.toml. Okay, let's just open up VS Code and see what that looks like. Cool. So we've got index.js. So this is what wrangler.toml. So this is a configuration file. This is their infrastructure as code because it's a simple platform. The Workers platform has 3 services. They don't need full-blown CloudFormation, that kind of thing. or Terraform equivalent. So test, this will be the name of my API. How you bundle it, so you can either be Webpack or JavaScript, or you can also, I think there's another WASM bundler as well. You put in your ID, workers dev true. So this is if it's a workers.dev account. So when you sign up to Cloudflare, you can apply for a namespace in their workers.dev. So for example, we've got serverlessdays.workers.dev is the workers namespace. If you have your own DNS name, you can just bring that in. So the root and zone ID elements are if you've got your own DNS name. The workers dev will be if you're using the workers.dev name, and you might use like a DNS CNAME to redirect to that. So this would be, call it test, it'll be test.serverlessdays.workers.dev. But it doesn't know what it's associated with, so I've got to associate an account ID there. Yeah. Where was I? Account ID. You need this a lot. Cool. So that's my account ID. Okay, I don't have any JavaScript in here. Let's go back to, this is Cloudflare. This is their doc site. I have everything in dark mode. It does dark mode. So let's just do this. We want it to return HTML. This is a relatively simple demo. Cool. Off we go. This isn't going to work. I'll tell you why. Let me also make this bigger. I've just copied and pasted this code. It's nothing special. Let's kill this. Okay, so it's just HTML and a template literal, a function to handle the request, just a return header. So that HTML gets written here, added to your response with your content type header. So on that add event, it's a fetch. So when a fetch event, someone hits the API endpoint, it responds with the HTML. It's relatively simple. This won't work, and I'll tell you why. So what you can do with, let's go. What you can do with Wrangler is there's two commands. One's called preview. Okay. So if you're ready to go live with this, you just go Wrangler publish, right? That's the easiest way to do this. It's pretty simple. It's not going to work because it requires a package.json. I don't know why Wrangler init doesn't just create a package.json for you, but it requires package.json. I think it's a JavaScript specific thing. So if you're using WASM, it won't require that. So let's just create a package.json. I could do npm init to create an entire one, but it only requires one field of package.json. I'll show you now. All it wants is the main field. It just wants to know where the entry point is. That's all it is. That's the only reason it needs package.json, is to know where the entry point is. One other thing is you can only send one index file, one JavaScript file up. So if you do have multiple dependencies, you want to be using Webpack, you can change this, which says type JavaScript, to Webpack, and it's got Webpack installed. I've started to use ESBuild because it's way faster than Webpack. But then I have a separate build step. So I have my package.json. I'll have a step which runs ESBuild, and then a secondary step which takes the output of ESBuild and uploads it. Okay, cool. Index.js. That's there. That's there. Okay, let's see if this publishes. Cool. JavaScript found. It hasn't given me an error. Remember, it gave me an error immediately. Hopefully this works. Cool. It's published. So you should be able to go see this live right now, because this isn't recorded. Cool. There we go. Really, really simple. That's a super simple example. Let's change the name. Hello, serverless Turkey. Cool. We'll call by a worker called Emma. We give Emma a new job. Cool. So we've done that. Save it. But now I might not want to push this live. I might want to, let me check it first. So you can do Wrangler Preview. So there we go. It just creates a preview link, which is useful when you preview things. And then look at this. It's now given you, so the previous, that cloudflareworkers.com, it's now giving you a preview link in cloudflareworkers.com. So you can see all your proper console outsources. You can look at network requests and that kind of thing. You can do some tests on it. You can add test data that you want to send to it, and so on and so forth. That's one way to look at it. Or, and that's now persistent. Or you go, let's just clear this again. Let's go Wrangler Dev. Now this is the other option. So what it does is it deploys your site to Cloudflare. So it deploys your site to Cloudflare and then tunnels it locally. So Wrangler's doing this this redirection locally. So it starts up the server that redirects to your now running site, your locally deployed / running site. So, and if I put that in, cool. And this is the development version. So it says, hello, serverless Turkey, markup generated. So here's our production version, or here's our live version, and here's our development version. And you can have a called state. You can create like separate environments within Cloudflare as well. So what you might end up having is production, staging, then developer specific environments within that, if you want to pay that. But the cool thing is this is still running. Let's go. Cool. Emra got tired of working. I'm going to do his job for him. Cool. And come on. Tick the changes. Come on. There, okay. I have to refresh. Yeah, I do have to refresh, so it's not going to auto refresh for me. But it takes the changes, it redeploys it. And there's Ant. That's quite cool. That's a very simple example. So see, we're almost out of time. So I'm going to show you a not so simple example. Cool. Let's finish this. Okay. So I've deployed GraphQL. So let me show you what this project looks like. Okay. I'll just zoom back out. Okay, so this folder here, this massive thing is a don't need to expand that modules. Build. This is a GraphQL project running in Workers. Let's see if it deploys. I haven't actually tested this in a while. So, so one of the key things with this is because the package script, I'm using ESBuild to package this. So yeah, run bundle. I just written a GraphQL npm script to do the running of it. Okay. Run bundle. I just call GraphQL for that particular project. Uses ESBuild, bundles it, see how quick it is. It's crazy. If you ever bundle anything, just use ESBuild now. Ditch rollup, ditch Webpack, use ESBuild. It bundles it, it puts it into this thing here. What the worker takes is just this index.js file. This is what ends up getting pushed through to Cloudflare. It's 8,200 lines of code. My actual code on this particular instance is what, about 34 lines plus the server. Yeah, so it's about 100 lines of code I've actually written. Then there's the GraphQL resolvers. This is for the ServerlessDays. I was just doing an experiment of potentially hosting the ServerlessDays API, event API there. So that's how this works. Cool. I'm going to npm run publish. What the publish command here does, actually it bundles and then publishes. It does it all in one. Cool. Yeah. Cool. Bundling, and now it's going to try and publish it. This will get there eventually. Cool. Now it's published, and this is our URL. Now it's GraphQL API. This particular one doesn't accept. It's not going to accept anything because it doesn't accept GET requests, so it only wants POST requests. There's a service called GraphQL bin, so let's use that. The endpoint. Cool. It's picked it up. If it doesn't pick it up, use the endpoint. And we can, there's no data here, but I'll show you here. We query our schema. So this is a schema I've created. That's GraphQL running within an endpoint. I can actually, because if you remember correctly, there's this API is actually the API. So let's have a look at that. It's going to do nothing there. Let's go implement GraphQL. Cool. Let's go. Oh no, that API.https. Because it's not valid, it's red. So ServerlessDays.workers.dev. Cool, it's valid. So actually, I've used this before. Got our schema again. It's there. That's all great. We've got this is just the data. This is just an example. So don't look at that data. This is a GraphQL query I'm running. It's almost instant. Let me try. Okay, so this is just an example in sponsors. Let's take out the sponsor detail out of that. Cool. Oh, there's no sponsor detail. Let's take out the timeline detail. Cool. That all goes. Put it back. That works. It's all working on in Workers. It's KB store only, and it works. It's fast. It's really fast. So it's interesting. You can actually test this out yourself. The data is not real, so ignore everything you see there. It's just test data right now. Yeah, so just GraphQL bin HTTPS API ServerlessDays at workers.dev. The only thing, my biggest problem with Workers is that it doesn't have a console where you can see errors. So the way you can in AWS go to CloudWatch logs and you can see all your errors, Workers doesn't have that. If you are using workers.dev, so let's go back to, what is it? I call it test. Let's go Wrangler dev. So if you're using dev environment and you log things out, you'll see them here, but in production you see nothing. So it's a problem. So if we go back, oh, no, that wasn't it. That wasn't it. Oh, yeah, code test here. So if I want to go console.log, hi there. Cool. Obviously nothing's done because nothing's invoked that. Let me go to, let me just go back here quickly. Okay, that's as we had it. And then it's outputted console.log there. So that's great. When you are in the Workers environment and production, you don't get logs. You have to use a third-party logging service. So the services you want to use, the one that's become quite popular, Sentry, you want to use something that's similar to that supports a browser API. So don't use a Node.js logging service. Use something that has a browser-based logging service. Thankfully, Sentry is probably the most widely used one. I've got another project that's using a thing called Toucan. So Toucan, this is it here, Toucan.js. It's just a wrapper around Sentry. So it's a reliable Sentry client for Cloudflare Workers. I started to implement Sentry myself, found this thing, I just used Toucan. It works really quickly. You can get up really, really quickly. You have to be bundling it. You just import it. define your parameters if you want to set a user, and then you can just add breadcrumbs and whatever else. That's the only thing, the only bugbear I have is that it doesn't really have a native. It's got metrics, can tell you the performance, can tell you how many times an API has been called. So here we go, this has been called 3 times in the last, you people have been hitting this nicely. 265 times, 265 successes, so on and so forth. You'll see the metrics are there, it's fine. But you're not going to get logs. You see, there's nothing that says logs. 50th percentile is 1.2 milliseconds. So the slowest was 11.8 milliseconds. This thing works. It's fast. It's good. You can do really interesting architectures with it. But the most important bit is that the KB storage enables you to actually start to push more of your application logic. Instead of your worker being just a gateway to cloud resources sitting somewhere else. Now with KB Store, you can have some sort of state, some sort of data on the edge, and you can put more application logic on the edge, which was great. Cool. I'm going to stop sharing. Now you've just got me.
And this was great.
That's it. Sorry, that was a lot. I hope that was enough. I hope I didn't speak too fast.
Yeah. No, I was not very aware of what you are doing with Cloudflare.
Sorry.
I also learned what's going on there, and it was very helpful for me and hopefully for everyone. So in the middle of kind of the session, there was a question about, can micro frontends be a use case for edge computing with focus?
Yeah, definitely. I think you could definitely do that because you can pre-render stuff within. So one of the issues with micro frontends obviously is if let's say you want to deliver a frontend to a user as a unified experience, and they're going to have, let's say you've got one team writing components in Vue.js and another writing components in React, another writing vanilla JavaScript, another has just got HTML. And now try to deliver a cohesive experience that's performant to a user becomes a challenge because you don't want to load React plus Vue plus all these things. Where you could use workers is actually to pre-render all that HTML. So do a request to the source and essentially compose all of that HTML into a single web page. So the end user, they won't even see React or anything else. They'll just get you could have all of that stuff pre-rendered, depending how dynamic the page needs to be. But yeah, it could definitely be a use case for that. There will be some limitations. The really interesting thing is you're seeing more and more front-end frameworks building components for serverless functions, not edge functions yet, but it will be coming. So there's either lots of tools that are going to start using these things, or the frameworks actually supporting them themselves. So yeah, you could use it, but there will be some limitations depending on how dynamic the data is. Yeah.
So Besta says that she hopes that this video doesn't become unlisted. No, you will be able to use the same link forever to listen us again, actually. So, and let's wait for some more questions for, let's say, 5 seconds. And if you don't have any more questions, we can with this night, and you can go back to the docs.
No, it's not a problem. Yeah, it's just one thing I want to say. I find it's a really interesting space because I looked at Lambda at Edge, Workers, and what Fastly are doing, and they're 3 very, very different approaches. And I find that fascinating because I find like in the traditional serverless space, Azure Functions, Google Cloud Functions, Lambda, the approaches aren't miles apart from each other. Whereas on the edge, they're just very, very different. I think that's because of the constraints. But you end up having a very different development experience, it becomes harder to move from one to the other as well. But yeah, I think it will be interesting. And it's interesting to see how these things push each other, how many, all these other companies that are adopting what Cloudflare are doing. I think Fastly is going to push both Cloudflare and Lambda to be more performant, even though they are a latecomer. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, I think.
Yeah. And one last question from my side: how can people reach to you for questions?
Twitter. So Twitter's the easiest. I don't respond to messages anywhere else. So at I am Stan on Twitter. At I am Stan. IAMSTAN. That's how you do it. Yeah. At I am Stan on Twitter. Yeah. Yeah. Easiest place to ask me questions.
Okay. It is just 1 hour now. It was very, very helpful for us. Thanks a lot, Ant.
Cool.
Thanks
No problem. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.